I think it's time everyone here knows the truth, my husband said, rising from his chair at the head of the anniversary table. He looked around at every face in that restaurant, relatives, old friends, people I had cooked for and cared for over 3 decades. Then he pointed at me and laughed. 30 years of marriage, and she still thinks this family belongs to her. He slid an envelope across the white tablecloth toward me. I didn't argue. I didn't cry, because the cameras above that dining room had already recorded something he didn't know about. My name is Laura Bennett. I'm 38 years old, and I work as a financial administrator at a mid-sized construction firm. I married young, full of hope and a genuine belief that partnership meant something. For most of my adult life, I worked quietly behind the scenes of my husband's family business, the kind of work that rarely gets acknowledged because it happens in spreadsheets and filing cabinets rather than boardrooms. I handled the paperwork during years when the company was barely staying afloat. I organized financial reports, signed off on contracts, and sat at the kitchen table at midnight working through invoices while my husband slept. I did it because I believed in what we were building together. His family never quite saw it that way. To them, I was always the woman who married in, rather than someone who helped build what they had. The comments were never loud enough to confront directly, just small things. A look across the table, a joke about how the business was really the family's achievement. As the company grew more successful, my husband grew more distant. The man who used to ask my opinion on every financial decision stopped mentioning the business at home at all. I told myself it was just stress. I told myself things would settle. The 30th anniversary dinner was supposed to be different. I thought maybe a milestone like that would remind us both of where we started. I sensed something was wrong the moment I walked in. If you've ever done everything for a family that treated you like a guest, you already know this feeling. The restaurant was the kind of place with low lighting and heavy menus, the sort of setting that usually makes an evening feel important. Everyone was already seated when I arrived. I remember the smell of garlic and warm bread, the sound of other tables laughing softly in the background. Our table was different. Quiet in a specific way, the way a room gets when people are waiting for something to happen. My husband barely looked at me when I sat down. His mother, seated 2 chairs away, gave me a smile I didn't trust. Throughout the meal, conversation moved around me rather than including me. I noticed a few relatives exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't watching. Then came dessert. My husband stood up and cleared his throat the way someone does when they've rehearsed what they're about to say. I thought for one brief second that he was going to make a toast, something warm, something that reminded people why we were all there. Instead, he looked directly at me and said the business had thrived in spite of me, not because of me. He said I had spent 30 years holding him back and taking credit for his family's hard work. His voice was calm, almost cheerful, the way people speak when they've convinced themselves they're being brave. Several relatives nodded. Not surprised nods, prepared ones. Then the envelope slid across the table. Divorce papers, neat and official. The table went completely silent. Someone near the window whispered something. Chairs shifted. I sat there and felt every set of eyes in that room land on me at once. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat quietly for a moment, and I think that confused him more than anything else I could have done. He kept going, filling the silence with more accusations, growing louder as my stillness continued. That's when I noticed the restaurant manager approaching, alerted by the rising tension. And above the manager's shoulder, mounted high on the wall, were 2 security cameras, both angled directly toward our table. Something clicked into place for me right then. Before I stood up and quietly excused myself, I stopped and asked the manager one simple question. He nodded. I thanked him and walked out of the restaurant while my husband was still talking. The family decided I had walked away defeated. They were already wrong. The next few days were genuinely difficult. I won't pretend otherwise. My husband's version of that evening spread quickly, the way a story travels when only one side is doing the telling. Relatives called to inform me, with varying degrees of sympathy, that I should simply sign the papers and move on. His mother was the most direct. She called on a Tuesday morning and said, without much warmth, "You should just sign the papers and walk away quietly." I thanked her for calling and ended the conversation. Social media added its own layer, vague posts from relatives about finally being free and protecting what the family built. Friends who had been to our home dozens of times began going quiet. My husband, meanwhile, moved through all of it with visible confidence, already speaking to lawyers, already discussing business assets he planned to sell without consulting me. I let him feel confident. I went home and started going through boxes. Over the years, I had kept everything. Not out of suspicion, simply because organized records are what I do professionally. I found contracts from the company's early years, financial restructuring documents from a period when the business had nearly collapsed, invoices I had personally authorized to keep suppliers from walking away. My name appeared on those documents, not as a spouse, but as a registered financial officer, a title that had been quietly assigned during a desperate period, and just as quietly forgotten once the crisis passed. I spread everything across my dining table and started building a timeline. Every document, every date, every signature. And I made a phone call. Daniel Carter had worked as a legal advisor connected to the company years before my husband decided his family no longer needed outside counsel. He was thorough, unhurried, and he remembered exactly how involved I had been during those early years. When I sent him the documents, he called me back within a day. "Laura," he said, and I could hear the shift in his tone, "do you understand what you're holding?" I told him I was beginning to. He came to my home and sat at my dining table and reviewed everything carefully. He pointed out that the documents didn't just show involvement. They showed that certain deals the company now valued most highly had only been possible because of authorizations I had made during a period when my husband had been focused elsewhere. Without those decisions, the company would have lost 2 major supplier contracts and likely folded. Then Daniel raised the other issue. My husband's statements at the anniversary dinner, made publicly in front of witnesses, directly contradicted what these records showed. If he had claimed in front of dozens of people that I had zero involvement in the company and the documents proved otherwise, that created a very specific legal problem for him. I remembered the cameras. I contacted the restaurant and made a formal request for the security footage from that evening. They confirmed it was available. Daniel reviewed the footage. He watched my husband stand at that table, point at me, and declare to the entire room that I had never contributed anything to the family business. He watched it twice. Then he looked at me and said, "We're ready." My husband walked into that lawyer's office expecting a formality. He brought 2 relatives with him, both seated like witnesses to a victory he had already celebrated privately. He began, almost immediately, repeating the same version of events he had been telling everyone for weeks. Laura contributed nothing. The business was built by the family. She deserves no part of it. The lawyer listened politely. Then Daniel placed the folder on the table. The room changed the moment the first document was read aloud. A contract from 15 years ago, signed by me in my capacity as financial officer, authorizing a restructuring agreement that saved the company's primary line of credit. then another, then a communication chain showing me negotiating directly with a supplier who had threatened to walk away from the business entirely. Document after document, each one telling the same quiet story my husband had spent weeks trying to erase. He tried to interrupt several times. "Those don't mean anything," he said. Then, "That was a different period." His voice had a new quality to it, something closer to alarm than confidence. That's when Daniel opened his laptop and played the restaurant footage. The room watched my husband stand up at that anniversary table and tell his entire family, clearly and loudly, that I had never contributed to the business in any meaningful way. Then they looked at the documents in front of them. The lawyer leaned back and began explaining, in measured, professional language, what it meant legally for someone to make false public statements that directly contradicted documented financial records in a divorce proceeding involving shared business assets. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. My husband stopped speaking entirely. I had been quiet for the entire meeting. I waited until the room had fully absorbed everything. Then I spoke. I said what I needed to say, calmly, without anger. I told them I had not come to argue. I had come to let the records speak, and they already had. The shift in that room was something I will not forget. After everything settled, some relatives reached out quietly. A few offered something close to an apology, careful and indirect, the kind people offer when they're embarrassed rather than truly sorry. Others simply stopped posting online and avoided the subject entirely. My husband became very quiet in the weeks that followed. No more public comments, no more confident announcements about the business. I moved forward with decisions that protected what I had spent 30 years helping to build, not out of revenge, out of fairness. I spent a long time believing that loyalty meant staying silent, that being steady and reliable meant letting other people tell the story. I know differently now. Silence isn't the same as agreement. Sometimes it's just patience, waiting for the right moment, the right room, the right document on the right table. They thought silence meant weakness, but sometimes silence is just patience, waiting for the truth. Have you ever been publicly blamed for something you spent years building? Have you ever had a family turn on you when you expected them to stand beside you? Tell me in the comments. Your story matters here. Subscribe and join this community, and click hype to help this reach someone who needs to hear it today. Thank you for listening.